Hi, I'm Mark. Let's go. Christmas breaks in a few days. We got some stuff still to cover. Hey, hurry up. Get that door closed. Close the books. Why? I'm a history teacher, and I'm going rogue. Yesterday's class, we were talking about the inspiration and legacy of Dickens' Christmas Carol. Today, let's look at A Christmas Carol's American cousin. It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart. Let's go rogue. What's that? I shouldn't use American cousin? Oh, that's the play Lincoln was watching when... Oh. George Bailey grows up in a small town of Bedford Falls. His father runs the building and loan that gives home loans to the town's residents, sometimes when they can't get a loan from the larger banks, like the one owned by Henry Potter. As a boy, George and his friends would ride snow shovels down a hill and onto a frozen lake. On one of his rides, his brother, Harry, falls through the ice. George pulls him from the frozen lake, saving his life. Also as a boy, George is hired as a delivery boy for the local druggist, Mr. Gower. When Mr. Gower messes up the prescription on one of his clients, the preteen George doesn't deliver the pills. When the customer calls Mr. Gower, telling him they didn't receive the pills, George tries to tell him about the mistake. Mr. Gower boxes the youth a couple of times in the ears, and before George can tell him about the mistake, George is left with hearing damage. These jobs that George does in his hometown make him well known. But what George Bailey really wants to do is see the world, to travel. He wants to be huge. But when his father dies, he has to take over the building and loan and finds himself stuck in Bedford Falls. He marries a local girl, Mary, played by Donna Reed. As the two are leaving on their honeymoon, there's a run on the Bailey building and loan. Hundreds of people demanding their deposits, which was common during the Depression. After trying to assure the depositors that their money is safe, you got it all wrong. The money's not here. Now, Mike, your money's in Joe's house, and Mildred, your money's used to help Fred build his house. What do you want me to do, foreclose on them? You'll get your money back because your neighbors promised to pay it back. But as the crowd continues with their demands, George relents and gives the people their deposits back, having to use the $2,000 that he had planned on using for his honeymoon. By the end of the day, the bank has $2 left. Henry Potter, played by Lionel Barrymore, is entirely willing to take the Bailey building and loan off of George's hands. Potter runs the big bank in town and doesn't want the competition from the upstart Baileys. But each time he offers to buy the building and loan, he's rebuffed by George. The people of Bedford Falls deserve better than Henry Potter. When World War II breaks out, George is ineligible for service because of his hearing loss. His brother, Harry, joins the war, becoming a pilot. He wins the Medal of Honor when he shoots down a kamikaze trying to sink an American troop transport ship. On the day of Christmas Eve, George's Uncle Billy is directed to make an $8,000 deposit at the bank. He meets Potter and shares the news of Harry's award. Harry Potter. Sorry. Harry's award with him. Bailey ends up losing. Now I'm all screwed up. Billy loses the $8,000 deposit in Potter's newspaper. Potter goes into his office and finds the cash inside of it. But he doesn't return it to the Bailey building loan. Jerk. Uncle Billy freaks out but tells George about the loss. Realizing that his financial institution is short $8,000, George loses it. He ends up on a bridge and prepares to jump off of it. But someone jumps in before him. So George jumps in and helps the other person to the bank. The other jumper explains that he is Clarence and that he is a guardian angel second class. He gets his wings when he becomes angel first class. George tells him that he wishes he was never born, and Clarence grants him his wish. They next make a trip around the city that was once Bedford Falls, but is now Pottersville, run entirely by Henry Potter, complete with dance halls, casinos, strip clubs. George's mother doesn't recognize him. Mr. Gower has just been released from prison, convicted of poisoning one of his customers because George was not there to stop the shipment of the bad drugs. Harry never won the Medal of Honor, and all the troops on that troop carrier died in a kamikaze attack because George wasn't there to save Harry when he fell through the ice. Mary is an old maid working at the Pottersville Library. Oh, what a mess the world had become since George Bailey never existed. George begins sobbing, telling Clarence that he wants to live. I want to live, Clarence. I want to live. Clarence then returns George to his real life. He returns home to his family and prepared to face the possibility of prison for embezzling the $8,000 that was lost. While at home, random people just start showing up at his front door with money for George to make up the $8,000. And they do. They sing Auld Lang Syne. A bell rings on the Christmas tree, and Zuzu announces that every time a bell rings, an angel gets his rings. George then says, well, that's right. Way to go, Clarence. Roll credits. It's a Wonderful Life was released in 1946, the year after World War II ended. The film is based on a story called The Greatest Gift, written in 1939 by Philip Van Doren Stern. The rights were originally bought by RKO Studios, who had negotiated for Cary Grant to play the role of George Bailey. RKO and Grant dropped the project and sold the rights to Frank Capra, the Steven Spielberg of the 1930s and 40s. During World War II, Capra was hired by the Defense Department to make the Why We Fight series to indoctrinate soldiers entering the military. Now the war was over and Capra was back in private business. He asked James Stewart to play the lead role, having worked with him on Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in 1939. But Stewart had spent the last 4 years fighting in Europe. The commander of a bomber squadron, winning the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Croix de Guerre. Returning home, he wasn't sure that his skills were yet on par for a major motion picture. Made on a budget of $3.2 million, its first run in theaters only barely made back a profit. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, but was shut out. It then disappeared, almost never to be seen again. You have a story about a guy that thinks his life is terrible. Who could associate with that in 1946? The greatest generation had just won World War II. We defeated Nazism, fascism, Japanese imperialism. Dudes were making out with random nurses on Fifth Avenue. We had the bomb, and nobody else did. The boys were home. For most Americans, the response to, gee, my life is terrible was, get over it. Dumas, get off the frickin' bridge. Do something with your GI Bill and buy an inexpensive house in Levittown. Then something happened. It shouldn't have, but it did. 28 years later, in 1974, things weren't going so good. Vietnam, the gas crisis, the Watergate scandal, the American public, which had big dreams but had given up on them, was now sitting alongside that bridge with George Bailey, ready to jump. They needed hope. They needed to be reminded of what they meant to the world, American exceptionalism. They needed a Clarence. Well, what do you know? The copyright on the movie lapsed and it became public domain. Soon, television stations were putting it on TV and Americans loved it. It became a staple for holiday viewing. It lifted Americans out of the funk of the 70s. In spite of its inauspicious release, in 1990, It's a Wonderful Life was deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant by the United States Library of Congress and selected for preservation in their National Film Registry. The American Film Institute, in its 10 top 10, the best 10 films in 10 classic American genres, It's a Wonderful Life was acknowledged as the third best film in the fantasy genre. The AFI also named Henry Potter, played by Lionel Barrymore, as the number 6 worst villain of all time. And George Bailey was number 9 on its list of heroes. It's a Wonderful Life. It's like A Christmas Carol, put on its head. Mr. Potter's the Scrooge character. Like Scrooge, he's a moneylender, but unlike Scrooge, he doesn't seek redemption. George Bailey is more like Bob Cratchit, the working man who dreams of better times. When he can't realize those better times, when those better times don't come, he chooses to end it all. It's not like a complete mirror, Dickens. Clarence, guardian angel second class, obviously fits the role of the spirits of Christmas, showing George a world in which he never existed. In the end, we have a complete change of heart with George Bailey wanting to live, sobbing to Clarence. In the end, George finds out just how much he is loved as the community comes to his aid, and he concludes that in spite of his dreams not being achieved, he does have a wonderful life. And if you haven't achieved anything you thought you would do when you were young, a man can still have a wonderful life, especially around Christmas time. Hey, Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. I hope I made your Christmas a little better, if only slightly. You know what would make my Christmas better? If you subscribe to my channel. We talk about history, particularly pop culture, sports, historical weirdities. I want to thank my producer, Casey Moulton, and Mr. Brent Allen for letting me borrow his studio here on the campus of Columbia High School. I had fun, but I don't quit my day job. And hey, if you ever feel bad because you gave $8,000 to the meanest guy in town, remember me. I'm Mark Haggard. I'm a history teacher, and I've gone rogue. Buffalo girl, won't you come out tonight? Won't you come out tonight? Won't you come out tonight? Buffalo girl, won't you come out tonight and dance by the light of the moon?